Besides the outbreak itself, Operation Cobalt, also known as the Sunset Protocol, was one of the most devastating events to occur in the Walking Dead universe. In the beginning stages of the outbreak, Operation Cobalt commenced in the early morning of August 28, 2010, and ended on September 10th of the same year, with the US military dropping napalm on most metropolitan cities in America and presumably Canada. 2 days after the outbreak went global, martial law was declared in America across all 50 states by the federal government in the morning hours of August 27th. The following day, the beginning phases of Operation Cobalt would commence. Initially, the protocol was designed to actually take the cities back from the dead by hand, with National Guards being deployed and overseas troops being recalled. As we see from the first season of Fear the Walking Dead, military units were deployed across the states to set up designated safe zones within suburban areas. Anyone lucky enough to be already inside one of these safe zones by the time the soldiers showed up would be placed under protection from the initial chaos of society collapsing. These safe zones would be set up in easily defendable areas and would include fences around the entire perimeter, in-home medical treatment, given the patient has not suffered a bite or scratch, in which they would be taken away and put down, and soldiers on perimeter watch around the clock. It sounds good in theory, but those that found themselves within a safe zone would be subject to orders by the military commanders and forcibly removed and relocated if seen as a liability to the safety of the zone. And this happened a lot more than you would think. Even signs of depression would be seen as a liability to the morale of the safe zone. That's right. The military would remove you from what's left of your family if you showed signs of depression. In the fucking apocalypse. And unfortunately, most of these civilians would never be seen again. Funny enough, the Alexandria Safe Zone and Campus Colony from World Beyond were initially set up as quarantine zones. During this 2-week period, US government officials would be evacuated to undisclosed areas, presumably what would be the Commonwealth, Portland, Omaha, and the soon-to-be Civic Republic of Philadelphia, as those are some of the few densely populated areas to survive into the post-apocalypse. From August 28th to September 9th, 2010, the soldiers would clear their area sector by sector, terminating any walkers in the perimeter and venturing further out each day. Little to the knowledge of the civilians inside the safe zones, this cleansing also included the living, regardless of infection status. Everyone outside the safe zones was shot on sight. Eventually, the overwhelming numbers of the dead would become too much for the soldiers to face, so on September 9th, 2010, orders by the President of the United States were drafted to enact a contingency plan, should the troops fail. And they did. On the evening of September 9th, all soldiers in dedicated safe zones were given orders to abandon their current posts, leaving all civilians inside confused and to fend for themselves. It's unknown where exactly these soldiers were recalled to, but we do know all of them knew what was about to come. Some would stick to their orders, while others would throw in the towel and leave to be with their families. In some instances, soldiers were given orders to execute those within safe zones on their way out. It's clear this came as a shock to many, as we see some soldiers, such as Huck from World Beyond, turn on her squad. But whether or not some soldiers defied orders, it wouldn't be enough to stop the contingency plan given by the federal government. And in the early morning hours of September 10th, 2010, areas designated as infected zones would be subject to bombings from the US military using air vehicles loaded with explosive materials, such as napalm. This would specifically include most major metropolitan cities across America and Canada. Cities confirmed to have been hit by the Sunset Protocol include Atlanta, Georgia, Lincoln, Nebraska, Los Angeles, California, Manhattan, New York, Phoenix, Arizona, San Diego, California, Seattle, Washington, and Vancouver, British Columbia, as mostly evident from Fear the Walking Dead Season 2, Episode 2. Portland is presumed to have also been hit by the protocol, but appears to have survived both the bombings and outbreaks within the city, and were able to rebuild. It's unclear whether Omaha, Nebraska was hit, as it visually appears to not be as decrepit as some of the previously mentioned cities, and survived into the post-apocalypse, but would suffer an equally as devastating event 10 years later at the hands of the Civic Republic military. Some cities, such as Chicago, were so bad that even the napalm wouldn't be enough to quell the dead, and would have orders by what was left of the federal government to initiate nuclear strikes on said cities. Although this would never be carried out, as crews on board submarines would either already be dead or refuse orders, as evident from the Fear the Walking Dead one-off, Dead in the Water. Any other major city not mentioned are presumed to have also been destroyed as a result of the operation. All except for one, Philadelphia. We learn in The Walking Dead The Ones Who Live, Philadelphia was meant to be bombed just like all the other cities, but in a twist of fate would not suffer that destiny, as the Pennsylvania National Guard would defy orders from the federal government and fight back against the oncoming attack. A key player in Philadelphia's survival was a U.S. Air Force pilot named Donald Okafor, who took part in the bombings of both Atlanta and Los Angeles. As he was on his way to bomb Philly next, he and his wife could not bear to have the blood of another city on their hands, and in an act of sacrifice, Okafor would bomb Lincoln Financial Field, which stationed over 4,000 soldiers, killing everyone, including his wife, and saving the city. The Sunset Protocol was meant to be an absolute last resort, as what came immediately following the operation was a total collapse of both the military and government. As mentioned before, old world leaders would have dispersed between the last surviving cities, but the exact location of where the president at the time would be is unknown. Soldiers would either abandon their posts, as no more orders were coming post-Cobalt, or try to band together and continue the job they were initially given. But eventually, like most things in the New World, the military would slowly die out, and any soldier left would eventually become survivors just like everyone else. The same can be assumed with the Navy, as we know no more orders came through after the green light for the nuclear launch. So most Marines would either live their lives the best they could on the ocean before the inevitable happened, or join their fellow survivors on foot in the wasteland. The biggest consequence of the Sunset Protocol was the loss of infrastructure, as most cities would lie in rubble post-Cobalt, and would remain overrun despite the bombings. What's interesting is that we hear through the Fear the Walking Dead radio wave short, Should I Peek report, a man claims to be watching the forests of Yosemite National Park and the Sierra Nevada mountain range burn from a broadcast station in Should I Peek. Meaning not only did the cities burn, but the surrounding areas did as well over the following months, and as there was no more infrastructure, the national parks would be lost as well. Some of these surrounding fires would never go out. In the case of the Blaze of Glory located outside of Lincoln, Nebraska, an old tire junkyard that burned the flames of Operation Cobalt all the way up until the 2020s. The operation may have taken out large amounts of the dead, but it wouldn't be enough, as North America would remain in a post-apocalyptic state for the unforeseeable future. Rising out of those ashes, however, remained the Pennsylvania National Guard, who, as previously mentioned, defied the federal government and saved Philadelphia from Operation Cobalt. Almost immediately following this event, the remaining 200,000 survivors would reform the city into the Civic Republic of Philadelphia, while the remaining soldiers of the National Guard would reform into the Civic Republic military, led by Major General Beale. The military wouldn't remain exclusive to the Pennsylvania National Guard, however, as we see Old World soldiers such as Huck high up within the CRM ranks. The military would ally with the city, but would remain separate in governance, eventually leading to a disproportionate power dynamic. The newly established CRM would use helicopters from the National Guard as their main form of transportation and survey the now decrepit country. But in the rubble, they would discover two other surviving cities, Portland and Omaha, and make contact, creating the Alliance of Three that would remain intact for the next 10 years. Operation Cobalt led to the fall of the most powerful military on the planet, but also gave birth to a new one as well. The Sunset Protocol was seen as a necessary evil at the time by the federal government, but as we see the state of the world 15 years in the future remains dead, one can wonder if the old world leaders would have any regret for ordering such a horrific operation. Well, that would be argued by some of the survivors out in the wasteland, as we hear from the Fear radio wave short titled Conspiracy Theory that a man had discovered the cause of the outbreak was a failed population control attempt by the American government. Keep in mind, the title of the short is literally Conspiracy Theory, so take this next part with a grain of salt. But the man claims to have classified files that appear to state the government has fled to the skies for safety, and claims to keep seeing the code word Noah appear across these files. If this conspiracy theorist is to be believed, then maybe Operation Cobalt wasn't a last resort like we thought after all. But as we never see any reference to any Operation Noah again in the future, it's to be assumed the man was probably just going insane. So what happened to the Civic Republic and the Alliance of Three? Well, that'll just have to be a video for another day. If you enjoyed this video today, folks, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button as well. Thanks for watching.